May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Have you ever heard of resignation syndrome? It's a terrible disease that has emerged among refugee children in Sweden, especially those in danger of being deported back to unspeakably dangerous homes. Otherwise physically healthy, these children seem to simply slip into something like a coma, so unresponsive that they have to be fed through tubes. And what cures it? Hope. When these children are granted a safe space to stay, they begin to emerge back into the world of waking again. Resignation syndrome is an extreme form of sleep. The world has just become too much, too dangerous, too frightening, too bloody, and if not offered hope of a way out, these young and vulnerable systems just shut down to protect themselves from consciousness. That is the spiritual state of the original audience of Paul and Matthew's passages, the passages we read today. The world has become too much. The fear is too great. The persecution feels like too much. And they're wondering, can they hold on? Is hope even coming? And the resounding answer to both audiences is yes, but you must stay awake, and you are part of making it happen. For many early Christians, the question of when Christ would return and right all wrongs was the question. The fiery excitement around Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and ascension spread across the world and made first century Christianity a perhaps unprecedented phenomenon. And many Bible writers and early Christians expected Jesus' return in their lifetime. There was an urgency and a passion in these early Christians that we probably will struggle to relate to or understand. They, though, could almost taste and see and feel the kingdom of heaven emerging in their midst. They were sure their sorrows would end and all would be made right. And so equally, there was discouragement, sorrow, disbelief, and confusion when the eschaton, the end times, did not materialize. That is the context for both of our readings today. Hope beyond hope, fervent belief, and confusion and disillusionment and a temptation toward total resignation. Paul and the writer of the Gospel of Matthew are both addressing people wondering, well, what do we do if Christ hasn't returned? How do we wait? How do we live? We were not expecting it to take so long for God's reign of love and justice and peace to fully materialize. So how do we live in this world of sorrow and brokenness and pain and uncertainty? And the answer they get is fully, with a willingness to stay awake and risk for the sake of love. Let's look at the parable in Matthew that speaks of what happens when the master has been absent for several years and finally returns. Before leaving, he gives away extravagant sums of money. 1 talent was equal to about 15 years of a day laborer's wage. So even the slave who receives only 1 talent is given an enormous sum. While he does what was considered a prudent way to safeguard something at that time, placing it in a hole in the ground, he is certainly not the example the parable wants us to follow. Clearly, we are meant to follow the example of those who took some big risks, as you would have to in order to double such an enormous sum, as you know if you have ever done any investing. This is a really interesting twist. The example of how we're supposed to live as we wait for the final revelation and completion of God's kingdom is not just to live wisely or make good use of what is given to us. It is to live riskily. As one commentator says, the eschatological, there we go, that's a mouthful. The eschatological passage is not so much about stewardship and the wise use of resources as it is about a willingness to resist fear, and like the first 2 slaves, to behave in risky and trusting ways. For in so doing, we enter into joy upon our master's return. And as another puts it, the greatest risk of all, it turns out, is not to risk anything, not to care deeply and profoundly enough about anything to invest deeply, to give your heart away and in the process risk everything. The greatest risk of all, it turns out, is to play it safe, to live cautiously and prudently. Orthodox conventional theology identifies sin as pride and egotism. However, there is an entire other lens through which to view the human condition. It is called sloth, one of the ancient church's 7 deadly sins. Sloth means not caring, not living, not rejoicing, not living up to the full potential of our humanity, playing it safe, investing nothing, being cautious and prudent, digging a hole and burying the money in the ground. I am reminded of Mary Oliver's beautiful poem, The Summer Day, and the question she poses at the end of it. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What will we do with our own one wild and precious life? How will we live, the parable asks us. It is tempting, for me at least, as life goes on, as hardships happen, as the bad things in the world pile up, to simply want to go to sleep or bury what we have. It is hard to stay present and live with the passion and reckless abandon for love and good acts that these passages call for. It is hard to risk our hearts and our time and our energy to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and love the marginalized, speak truth to power, bring healing and wholeness and our whole selves to a world in need. It is hard to even do what Paul calls us to do. Be at peace with one another, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all things. It is honestly just much easier to simply let our faiths be a list of beliefs we more or less hold on to, rather than a wholehearted way of being. But being a Christian means at its heart to be a follower of Christ, not just someone who believes in the existence of Christ plus a few other doctrines. And what did this Christ who we are meant to follow do with his life? We know he lived with abandon, pouring his life out and investing it in person after person, need after need. We know he loved with abandon, weeping when his friend Lazarus died. He told the truth with abandon and served the cause of justice and peace and the will of his Father, even when it led him to the cross. And we know that that was not the end. Mary Oliver's poem wonders what we will do with our one life, and it's an important question. This is a one-time opportunity each of us has here on earth. And yet we are also people who believe that our one life doesn't simply end. We are people who believe that Christ's extravagant life and love could not be held down by the grave. And that same resurrection life wants to take hold of each of us, capture our hearts, help us to enter into the risk required of those who would dare to believe that their efforts matter, that they have something to offer this broken world, that good can come out of even the worst corners of pain and suffering, that kindness matters. Christ's love and life want to take hold of us and help us to risk loving him and loving one another and the world with the same abandon he did and still does. The great banquet, the master's joy, the kingdom of heaven here on earth, they're still in progress. And it can be painful to live in the in-between, sometimes nearly unbearable. It is just challenging to know how to stay awake to Christ's call to us and to a world in need and to live well in such an imperfect world. But if we support one another on the journey, we can do this. Jesus lived with extravagant love, and whether we know it or not, that extravagant love and resurrection life run through our very veins because Christ loves us and has taken hold of us after risking it all. Let us embrace that resurrection life and live it to its fullest. And if things are unbearable right now, and you cannot see or feel that life, let God hold you. Let us as a community hold you. When we are tempted to resign, to give up and go to sleep, Let us love one another back into living fully with reckless love and joy and hope. We are in this together, and we are accompanied by love itself. Love will win. Thanks be to God.